Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cooke.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cooke. I'm the COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our HCMx Radio podcast. Welcome everyone today, and I'm so excited to have with me is Camille John, the Senior Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion and Underrepresented Talent Strategy at Bank of America. Welcome, Camille.
Hello, Rachel. Appreciate the invitation, and I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you. And just to give our listeners a little bit of a background about you, you are Camille's based in Greater Washington. Camille has spent the last 15 years at Bank of America in financial services across disciplines, including global commercial banking and the private bank. She is now the enterprise lead for underrepresented ethnic talent within the Global Diversity and Inclusion Organization. You have recently expanded your role, so I'd love to learn a little bit more about what that looks like and how your new position or responsibilities are, what that is like. And also, you are very passionate about leading better money habits, financial literacy presentations, and you are a highly sought after speaker. Camille holds a Bachelor in Science and Clinical Science from Howard University and an MBA from Johns Hopkins University.
Yes,
so,
right.
So that, you have a lot of other accolades, but for, our listeners today or viewers today, what else can you share about your interest, your new position or responsibilities at Bank of America?
Sure. So first off, I'm American born, but I'm Caribbean bred. And so I am a first generation American. And for many of those that have had that experience, you grow up in multiple worlds where you're an outsider, insider of sorts, where you may not be Caribbean enough, not American enough. And so you always have and grow up with the opportunity where you're feeling a little bit about being another, right? And trying to really find your place and your voice. But I'm really proud of my heritage and the ability to be able to get great education here. You mentioned that I had a healthcare background, so I did have a previous life in healthcare before moving into the financial services industry. And really, in my business experience, I spent some time with our sales management and revenue enablement activities, as well as leading around operational risk and driving more emphasis and awareness around our business tools. But all through that, I had a night job, which is really being a diversity and inclusion champion, either through sponsorship, mentorship of employees, and having conversations with other employees that look like me, and spending time as a chair of our employee network, Black Professional Group, which I did back in 2016 and 2017. And it was actually through that work that what we'll talk about today, our National Women Ready to Lead program started. But when I really think about moving into the work, right, and being having more of diversity and inclusion in my day job, I made that move last year, and what a time to join. None of us would have been aware or could have foreseen what would happen, both with the pandemic and then the humanitarian crisis. And I think the pandemic just slowed us down, frankly, enough so that we could really pay attention to what many people knew for years, going back in our history of several inequities amongst, our racial groups, and really thinking about what that means in the context of a humanitarian reckoning, right, that we have. And so I find it, and I was proud to be able to come in at this time and jump in with the team and provide some value. So I co-lead now our underrepresented ethnic talent work, focused on our Black and Hispanic Latino communities, but also have taken on some of our external partnerships. So I lead our Black external partnerships with several key relationships, as well as our inclusion education. So really focusing on how we're bringing people and teams together in terms of inclusion education in our summits. So anywhere where we can bring the engaged and then what I would call the unconverted, right? Those that are still trying to find their way around, they're still early in their D&I journey and really wanting to learn more. So we provide thought leadership on various platforms, which we'll talk about later as well.
Yes, and Bank of America, you've been, your organization has been very invested in inclusion and diversity from early on, I would say, or earlier than a lot of other industries. I think such a focus. And I recall going back 6 years ago or so when we launched our first Women in Leadership and Diversity Summit. And your team, we've had multiple different speakers from your organization, and they were so passionate about just feeling included and being able to, it was Nimrata, she sits under your team or on your team. And, I heard her just, the passion she had, hearing it before everything that's coming out now. So I think that's something to be said. And, we are also have had such a, just respect for your organization and everything that you have done and the journey that you're on. So that's why I'm really excited to hear from you today about the initiative that now has really grown into a larger program for women ready to lead programming at Bank of America. And, this is something you've won awards in and that I know you're very proud of. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is? The strategy, the approach, the benefits, all that good stuff.
Sure, and I'm glad you called out Namrata. That is actually my direct leader, and I'm really proud to have the opportunity to work with her, as well as our mighty team. We get a lot done within our broader diversity and inclusion organization, and you're absolutely correct that we have just some of the most dedicated, passionate professionals that I have the pleasure of working with side by side and every day as we really go out and lead in this work. I'll take one step back because there are two things I didn't mention and then go into the program. But one, my husband is in law enforcement, and we love to travel. We haven't been blessed with children, but I have the pleasure of being an auntie, right? I have a niece who I call my surrogate daughter, and we're very close considering how some people may have relationships with their aunts. And I mention her because a lot of the work that I do and really in shifting my career and thinking more about legacy has really been about really helping to smooth the way for her. And while we cannot reduce and should not reduce all of the adversity that's ahead for our kids, because adversity helps to build character. When I look at the fact that she's, assertive, she's unafraid to question the status quo, she's really curious, she's brilliant, and really wanting to just move things out of the way where there are certain expectations of what she should have the ability to do as a woman of color. How can we, continue to break those barriers for her? And so I'm excited because we have now our first Black and Asian American vice president, and we're seeing several women of color move. And so as we think about our Women Ready to Lead program, a lot of the focus has primarily been on women of color. And I had the pleasure, while being a chair as in our Black professional group, to be a founding member of this Ready to Lead program. And we had our first conversation with a group of women, and it came from one of our fantastic executives who really saw that there was a need. And I want to applaud her for her vision, that she saw there was a need to have conversations because of the amount of women leaders that were reaching out to her, looking for advice, looking for how can they, move their career that may feel unstuck, they may feel a little stuck in. And she would, have these conversations. And she said, listen, we need to bring this group of women together and really talk about what this is. And so that's really a lot of where it came from. And then the name was really a nod to the Center for Talent Innovations Black Women Ready to Lead report, which we co-sponsored, and we had some of our leaders sit on and be interviewed, and really talked about the fact that there were some differences in terms of the experience, particularly of Black women, to be able to flourish and to excel, and many of them wanted, and those was 2 of the 5 things, but also they wanted meaning and purpose to empower others, to be able to be empowered, and to earn well. And so when we looked at in the report some of the differences between Black women versus their white female majority counterparts, that there were just some differences in terms of that level of wanting the top job, wanting to be ready, and just, unpacking what was getting in the way. So with a lot of that as the backdrop, we had, first conversation, first summit, and we were able to really sit down in a very intimate setting, so in person, and talk through different themes, be it from Black women's health, talking about the concepts of mentorship and sponsorship and, executive presence, and really unpacking that for this group of women. And then by the next year, when we formally launched in Atlanta, it just began to take off like wildfire. And so I think some of the key things that were successful about the program has been the ability to just have some authentic dialogue, right? And many times women of color are, feeling otherized because you may be one of very few in your group, on your team. And so that could be isolating, and being able to talk about that, ask questions in an environment that's both safe and brave, and being able to really go through several topics and demystify what could be getting in the way and growing your career, but also celebrating the brilliance of those women, right? Because sometimes you need to be told that you can succeed and to dream bigger than what you see. And then the last is to have examples of women who are at the top of their organizations, and them really pouring into these women, but providing a level of example. And, as one of those women who were in the room, even if I was planning, part of the session, a big part of the session, and on the planning committee, I was also tremendously inspired by having, leaders like Cynthia Bowman, who's our Chief Diversity Officer, in the room, and seeing them that they can succeed at this company, they can succeed within the corporate construct. So wanted to just lay that out because those elements are really critically important for those groups. And from there, it took off. We've obviously seen a lot of magic in the topics, talking about the intersection of being a woman of color, being a woman, and then whatever other intersections are there for the group, and being able to engage. And even though in the pandemic, initially we were reticent to keep growing the program, first because we wanted to be mindful of the context, but we started to see women were still getting together. The groups that initially started have consistently, they were using technology, and so we've made the decision to keep growing that this year, and launching new programs, because having this now virtual environment has actually created a lot more opportunity. You can have more reach, deeper into our pipeline, and using technology, have several of those sessions where we would now before have to fly out to a certain city or bring someone in. Now, I can just click on like I did with you and start to have that connection. And so that's been really a great thing that we've seen. And the other great thing this year is that we will be bringing in speakers across the broad program. So any of our alums, we are, making sure to have a reunion of sorts by bringing in a recognized speaker and just going through those topics and themes and making sure everybody can hear it right together, and then have conversations with their individual group members and figuring out, what that looks like. And so in terms of reach, we've touched well over 1,000 women. We are, expanding into other markets. So it's initially been delivered in our markets, but
You in, or how are women selected for this?
so we make sure that our market HR partners are really reviewing those lists and making sure that we are thinking about the women that should be in the room, right? That would benefit from that conversation. And the great thing is we can engage with a broader group of women than you would for a traditional leadership development program where you would have, fewer slots. And then we're also making sure that we're engaging with managers too, right? So that they know, one, that their employee has been selected, their teammate has been selected, but giving them content and context so they understand some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, things that they should be aware of, that their particular teammate could be experiencing. So they can talk about it as well after the session and think about it in terms of their development planning.
Okay, that's great. And how long does this last? You mentioned you have alumni. If I recall, it's a 1 to 2 year program. Is that accurate?
So I would say that it's really each market decides what delivery it is, right? And in most cases, there have been summits, so at least a 1-day summit where they'll come in person. Some of the markets have decided to do small groups from there so they can sustain and make sure they're staying connected. We have what we call our Power of 10 platform. So many have used that Power of 10 approach and had, sponsors to continue talking. Some markets may have multiple summits per year, if you will, bringing in topics. But in this environment, now you can have a session with someone for an hour, 2 hours. And so it's up to what that delivery looks like. But with us establishing a national program office, it allows us to also have broad speaker and leadership development topics that we can deliver to all of the women that have had the opportunity to be engaged over the last few years.
And the conversations are very powerful, as you mentioned in the beginning. And I find what is really exciting when we bring people together is to really get to hear about who you are and what you've gone through and those experiences and stories, and that's what inspires others to either learn from it or to perhaps use that as some type of mentoring, or an example of how what they can look forward to or what they can think about for themselves. So I know that's very powerful. And so tell us a little bit more about the initiative. Besides getting together, what is happening in between the events? How are you staying connected with these women, and what resources do they have in between the events?
Sure. So because we have such a robust inclusion education platform across the enterprise, we will invite women to join sessions that we think will be beneficial and really relevant to them, and looking for opportunities to continue getting together. And I love what you shared about the storytelling, because it's helpful in terms of an example. We call those I Rise stories, right? It just helps to make women look more human. So someone that you perceive in biographies and headshots are always so wonderfully airbrushed. And this just brings it back down to a human level and lets me know not only is this someone that looks like me, but their story may sound very familiar. There's some things about it that I can connect to and continue to grow. And so we look for ways to continue providing additional resources to our women, so that they can continue having the conversations on our own. For example, in the small groups that I mentioned, through several of the resources from our inclusion education platform.
And you mentioned also empathy in one of our last conversations, which I thought was very powerful. I think the stories also, whether you relate to it or not, it allows you to understand better differences in struggles or successes that you may not have been aware of, or just have that deeper understanding of. So I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, and that's been my main thing since we've always heard of empathy, which I understood the concept, but I would give credit to Isabel Wilkerson, who wrote the book Cast, and which was released last year. We brought her in, and she talked about the concept of radical empathy. And so it's not just the listening to understand so I can judge it and judge them, and say, hey, here's what I would have done differently if I was in those circumstances, but really understanding what in their circumstances, their perspectives had them create the series of decisions and experiences that they've had, and then figuring out how can I use that understanding to build connection, to think about how I can serve as an advocate and I can help others who may be in very similar situations. And so the great thing about having these conversations initially, I would say with these groups, it's powerful in building that connection. But when we think about the backdrop of last year, and I'll give a little bit of a nod to our Let's Get Real Courageous Conversations platform, the conversation's gone mainstream, right? So where you weren't talking as much about the intersection of race as it relates to gender, we're definitely having those conversations more now. And we've had that dialogue throughout our company, with the unfortunate killing of George Floyd. That really opened up a national conversation because it resonated in such a very visceral way with many people. And so that had us unpack courageous conversations, which we've already had for years at the bank, but we were able to address more of the elephant in the room and really start to talk about the treatment and, the belonging and what are those experiences. And so that has been so powerful in building more of that empathy and connection that we're talking about, with way broader audiences than you would just do in these individual groups. I think that's been extremely powerful. We've reached 165,000 of our employees, with more than 300 official conversations, but it's really continued to spread and many people are leaning in. And that's been exciting because when we think about supporting our women broadly, throughout the organization right now, Courageous Conversations is one of the most amazing things you can do because there's so many different aspects of the dialogue, right, and different perspectives that we can drive. And we've definitely continued to do that over the last year.
And you made another point too about, some of the drivers behind, some of the conversations we've been having, or how we focus our research, and some of it, I think going back and reflecting when we kicked off our first Women in Leadership Summit, and we kept hearing, in a lot of studies that we did, that some of the larger industry studies out there about, it's going to take another 100 years before women level out or find equality in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And so, though, this year has been a unique year this past year, what do you think how do you think things are changing? And do you still think that it's going to take another 100 years? We're already starting to see a shift in more women leaders, from the vice president to Starbucks and, other, things that are occurring, and mandates that are also being put out there. So what do you think from your point of view or experience?
From my point of view, I believe where we are now has really made people feel more of a sense of urgency, because there is a call like none other that we need to have progress, and it cannot continue to be incremental progress. There needs to be steady, measurable movement. And so I don't think it will take 100 years. I think we're going to continue to see ebbs and flows, right? Because when you have things like what we saw last year, it really opens up the dialogue to let us know that, okay, we were on the right track, nice start, but now you have to continue pushing forward even faster and harder. And so that's where I think the broader conversation about inclusion, uniting everyone so that people don't see it as a way of, I'm giving up something, but here's what we're gaining by bringing in more women. And really starting to make sure that we're unpacking the benefits. It's not just that we're doing it because it's the nice and moral thing to do, right? There are absolute benefits in terms of the outcomes from your teams by having women lead, by continuing to see more progress, obviously, for women of color as well in that movement. And so I don't think it'll take 100 years, given moments like this, but we'll see what happens when we are now experience whatever the new normal everyone keeps talking about, that we're reimagining now. And I'm hoping we're not going back to the old normal, right? I think it's really about what does the new familiar thing need to look like, so we're continuing to hold ourselves accountable for that progress and making sure that it's urgent and it's constantly, we're not taking our foot off the gas.
Well, hopefully in the new normal, where we can come back together again more frequently and we're able to host our conferences, I'd love to have you in person and have you share your thoughts and progress and examples of how you continue to evolve these initiatives.
Absolutely. I'll be glad to do it and looking forward to it.
In the meantime, we'll continue to do more of these virtual podcasts and webinars where it feels like we're almost in person, right? It doesn't feel, I feel like you're kind of sitting across the table for me.
Yeah, you've gotten used to it now. And to be honest, the impact is so much greater than when we were in person. We would have had to schedule, fly. And while there's nothing that can replace that being able to touch each other, I'm glad that we've had technology to really bridge that divide during this time. So we have we can really engage and continue the dialogue and continue the work. So this has been a great way to make sure that we're staying focused as well as connected while we are physically distanced. So we're not socially distant. Our CEO says we're physically distanced, and I agree.
Well, we have VR, so that's almost kind of, they'll have to come up with some kind of functionality where you're on a virtual meeting and you can actually like high five or like shake hands and it feels like you really are.
Yeah. I am sure that we'll see something roll out as quickly as
I'm the one that mentioned it if it comes out from Google or Microsoft.
Yeah, they may be listening, so we'll see something roll out, I'm sure, in the next month or so.
I'll be getting ads frequently.
Exactly.
All right, Camille, is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything else anything that you'd like to leave our listeners here today with?
No, I was just really have anyone look at our human capital report to understand where else our firm is leading the way. I absolutely wouldn't be able to leave the conversation without talking about the progress that we've had with the representation on our board. We have more than 50% women within the organization, and there's several other things that we've driven, partnerships with organizations such as Athena for leadership development. And so I'm extremely proud to see how we've stepped up, not just for our women, but for our employees during this time of the pandemic, which no one, right, could have really foreseen. And the way in which they've continued to embrace and make sure that we are supported has been amazing. So I would really raise that, and happy to discuss it more the next time we connect.
And that would be wonderful. And just to reiterate for those of you, Bank of America and your team has been awarded multiple gold awards from Brandon Hall Group for this initiative and other diversity initiatives across also HCM areas within leadership and learning. So you are truly a remarkable organization and have, members like you and others that are amazing. So thank you for the great work that you're doing. Thank you for joining me today. and talking a little bit about some of what's happening now and what you anticipate for the future. So excellent work, and thanks so much. Thank you all for listening today or viewing us, watching us, reading about us. We'll have a variety of a few different options to listen to our podcast or read our podcast, and we'll be and watch. So stay tuned, and thanks again. Take care. Bye, Camille. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Thanks for having me.